Nighttime logic is the part and parts of the story that is felt but not consciously processed. It's also the name of our series. And welcome to those who are joining us. For you, I am guessing it will be October the 15th. So welcome to our listeners. But today is not the October the 15th. It's before that. And I'm here with Ian Rogers, author of the new novel from Cemetery Dance Publications, Sycamore. Welcome, Ian. It's great to have you here. How are you?
I'm good, Daniel. Thanks for having me. It's always great to be talking with you.
Yeah, great to be talking with you. Congratulations, not only on the release coming very soon of Sycamore, but also you've had a great year. You've released some excellent books. Why don't we start out before we take a trip to the Blacklands? Tell us about what you've been doing since we last spoke and some of the books that you've had out this year.
It's been
if we can.
It's been busy in the best way. Yeah, last year I sold 5 books actually, and four of them have been announced. So 4 have been announced, and a year later now, they've all started to come out. So the first one that came out was actually this one right here. It's a novella called Gray from PS Publishing, and as you can see, they did a great job. That's a cover artwork by the great Jeffrey Allen Love. Wow. This is sort of like a religious action horror fantasy. I've been describing it as John Wick, but with angels and demons. So kind of like that Richard Cadre kind of, Good Omens kind of a vibe, angels and demons, but in a contemporary fantasy kind of a story. Yeah.
Is that the one that launched in Worldcon, if I'm not mistaken?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. And that was another reason why this year's been so crazy. That was like my first trip to the UK. My first convention in at least 7 or 8 years, well before even COVID.
Wow.
So I haven't had a book out in a long time. This was my first book out in over 10 years since Every House is Haunted. So I hadn't been going to conventions for a while. I didn't really feel like there was a reason to go. And I sort of wanted to wrap this up into a trip so that my wife would come with me. And we'd never been to Scotland before. So all these things sort of came together. And it was just great to be there at this giant convention and to be there for like my first book launch in years. I got to meet all the PS Publishing crew. I got to meet like Conrad Williams. I got to reconnect with people I hadn't seen in a long time, like my friends like Nick Mamatas and Sarah Langen, David Demchuk, Molly Tanzer, like all kinds of people. I could go on and on. It was just like all these conventions. It's the people that you see that you reconnect with. That's the best part, in my opinion. So,
celebrating books and celebrating the people who write them is such a joy, and I followed along on social media, so it was great to see the launch of Gray and great to see that. What's and you have another? I want to hear about all 4 of the books. I know of 2 of them. What is the second one?
So the second one, and it's actually just shipping this week, is my debut novel, Family, and that's from Earthling Publications. Sort of see there without the glare.
Fantastic.
And it's kind of like a haunted house story, but with a twist, of course, because haunted house stories have been sort of done. And I knew that I wanted like my first novel to sort of be in honor of some very traditional horror tropes, but also doing my own thing. It's also the fact that Every House is Haunted was sort of ostensibly a haunted house collection. I kind of wanted to sort of revisit that and do the same thing in novel form and say, can I bring anything new to the haunted house story as an author? I think most authors want to challenge themselves with each new work so that it doesn't become like boring for them. If it's boring for you, it's going to be boring for the reader. So I thought, well, can I do a story with a sort of contemporary family with a setup that you've sort of seen before, but do something different with it? Of course, whether or not I succeed or not is really up to the reader. And now that copies are going out, I have to say I'm really nervous about what's going to happen over the next few weeks.
Well, I think if any house, if Every House is Haunted is any indication, I think readers are going to be delighted. For those of you who haven't tuned in, I really loved Ian's collection. That was it was reissued by Cemetery Dance pretty recently, a year or 2 ago. Then it came out. Did it come out about 10 years ago? The first edition of it?
Yeah, it was 2012 was the first edition, and then it was 10 years. I sort of jokingly called it the 10-year anniversary edition. Was when Cemetery Dance did their 2022. Yeah, like 2 years ago. It was October as well. Yeah,
and that's when I caught up with the book, and it is a haunted house collection. It really is great. How just all these really unique and fun and interesting takes on the haunted house genre. And I'm the sort of reader where I like the iteration. I like something new. I like, a little bit of subversion in it. So that's why I really enjoyed that short story collection. And my family sounds so great. But so before we get to the Blacklands, what are the other 2 books that are coming down the pipe?
Ooh, well,
If we can, are we allowed to say?
Sycamore is the third, of course, and the
Sycamore's
fourth is a collection of Blackland stories called Supernatural Tales, and that's a reprint of a collection that came out actually around the same time as Every House is Haunted from a Canadian press called Burning Effigy, and that was run by a woman named Monica Kubler, who actually works at Bloomberg magazine.
Yes.
So it was actually really cool. She did the first 3 Blackland stories that introduced Felix Wren, the detective character, and the Blacklands as chapbooks. So then what we did is we collected the 3 chapbooks and a short novel called The Brick into this collection, Supernatural Tales. So it actually functions as kind of a prequel to Sycamore. It leads up to Sycamore, and there's actually a short story at the end called My Body, which functions as a epilogue for Sycamore. So it picks up right at the end of Sycamore. So I really like the fact that.
When is that hitting? When is that coming out?
I think it's going to be around August or September of next year. So
wow.
We want to do like one Blacklands book a year, and we thought this one would be really great because it functions as a prequel and a sequel for Sycamore. It brings this book back into publication again and gives me some time to sort of get the second Felix Wren novel written and whipped into shape. So that's obviously what I'm working on right now, so I can make sure it's all right. I don't want people to have to wait for the books. If they like them and they want more, of course. I don't want them to have to wait, George R.R. Martin length of time for these books.
Wait a lifetime. But oh wow, that's exciting news. And it's great because my next question was to tell it to enough fanfare. Tell us for the uninitiated, without going into spoiler territory. Just tell us in general, for those who may not know, what are the Blacklands, in addition to just being the collective name of this group of short stories and novels about the Blacklands. What are the Blacklands? What these stories are all that recurring element about?
To me, like whenever I try and describe it, and I've had to do it quite a bit lately when I'm actually been pitching a Blacklands film right now, so I've had to really reduce it to this form for, as my manager said, like the dumbest studio executive that's not going to get any alternate realities or dimensions. Like he had don't mention portals, don't mention this. Like they're not going to they're not going to get any of that. So the way that I described it was like sort of the classic elevator pitch, and I said that, well, it's a supernatural version of the TV show The Wire. And they get The Wire because everyone loves The Wire. And I said, because the recurring character aren't the people that come and go. The recurring character is the world itself. Sort of like in The Wire, the recurring character was really the city of Baltimore. And you had different characters coming in and out every season. So even though I might write a lot of stories from the point of view of, say, a detective character like Felix Wren, I can also write stories about other characters or just standalone characters who you never see again. But it's the world that's the recurring element. And the world is basically what happened is back in the 1940s, these portals started showing up all over the place. And they are doorways to a dimension that lies next door to our own. And it's this a world of perpetual night that's filled with every supernatural creature you can imagine, including a whole bunch that you can't even imagine that we don't even have names for. And every now and again, these creatures get dumped over into our world, or people will, accidentally cross over into the Blacklands because these portals are everywhere and they're invisible. It's like a worldwide crisis. Like, what if you woke up tomorrow and ghosts and vampires and werewolves and monsters just existed? How would that affect society? How would that affect religion, politics, everything? So one of the ways that I tried to really drill down to a basic human level of how this would affect people was, think about when your kid is scared at night. They have a nightmare, and you sort of reassure them that it's okay. There's no monsters. Monsters don't exist. In my world, you can't say that. Kids, monsters do exist. They're going to learn about it in school eventually. Once they get to their section on the Blacklands history, it's there. So I wanted to have this world where there's this palpable dread of the supernatural looming over everyone, where the world sort of understands certain things about how certain aspects of it work, but other parts of it are complete unknown. Like we're not really comfortable with this world, we got our finger in the dike. We're going to sort of hold it off to a certain degree, but every year more portals are appearing, and we don't know how to close them. We section them off. We build facilities around them to contain them and study them. But that's why I really wanted to, first and foremost, explore it through this character of Felix Wren, this private investigator, because I love detective fiction. And the occult detective is a well-known character as well. It's, I love mixing supernatural and noir. To me, it's like the peanut butter and chocolate of fiction. They go together so well. It's almost like they were meant to go together. And I'm certainly not the first person who's done that. Going all the way back to like
Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And more modern people, obviously. I think the one that I love the most, and I would say it's a one-off, but he did do a sequel that was published posthumously, was William Hjortsberg's Falling Angel, that became the movie Angel Heart. To me, that's the epitome of supernatural noir in its purest form. And then secondly, there was Clive Barker's Harry D'Amour stories. And he did a few of them. Like I always, that was one thing where like he could have done 20 of those books and I would have gobbled them right up. But he's a small character in The Great and Secret Show. He's got a bigger part in Everville, and then he appears in a handful of short stories, and then in the Scarlet Gospels, and then that was it. So it's just like I wanted more. Like I said, I wanted 20 books with this guy. So that was really my inspiration of what could you really do with a long-running horror series with this character, because you don't see that a lot. It's I think as a writer yourself, and I know how hard it is to sell a series these days. Usually they're science fiction or they're fantasy. You might be able to do a duology or a trilogy, and hopefully your book sells enough that it doesn't get orphaned and you don't get to finish the series, because that does happen. I'm sure we both know people who never got to finish their series.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, but you don't ever see like an ongoing horror series. It's the closest you really sort of get to it, I guess, would be kind of like Charlene Harris's Echo series, which are more, I think, the romance fans, the paranormal romance fans, kind of really supported that. Or say Jim Butcher's Harry Dresden stories, which are again more fantasy. They're more magic based. So these two sort of come up to the edge of horror, but they're not really horror series. So I thought, I feel like there's an audience for that, and I'm not saying that I'm the only one who's doing that or the only one trying to do that, but I've seen the resistance. When we tried to shop Sycamore to the Big Five, people loved the book. They were very interested in it, but they did not want to invest in what I was basically calling a supernatural Spencer for hire. I was like, Robert B. Parker did like 30 or 40 Spencer books before he passed away. I want to do the same thing with Felix. I want to do it. It's not a trilogy. It's not really just going to keep going, keep doing them.
Glad to hear there's more Felix on the way. You touched on so many things that I want to, I just kept on listening, but you did touch on so many things I'm going to ask you about in the next couple of questions. But before we do that, like, you introduced the book really well, and even in, I just want to let readers know that Sycamore, it really does stand alone. If this is your entry point to the Blacklands, despite having a really complicated and vast world, it's a really self-contained, really lean and mean, tight story. It really introduces the Blacklands so succinctly. I think the way it's introduced in the book is simply like, the Blacklands, it's the supernatural world that lives right next door to ours.
Mm-hmm.
And things are crossing over both ways. And that's all you really need to know for Sycamore. My experience with the Blacklands before I read Sycamore was really a joyful reading experience, sort of like the way you talked about it in Barker. It was like, I was reading a bunch of your stories, and I think in one of the interviews I asked you, I'm like, hey, these seem connected, and you're like, funny you should say that. Yeah, you're picking up on these and what's really cool about it is the Blacklands, since the Blacklands is the character like Baltimore in The Wire, and setting as character, it's this wonderful opportunity. When you say, you could have 35, 40 stories about it, I believe it, because you could have different focuses, different tones, different genres. Sycamore, what is really one of the things that's really special about it is it's really a noir book. It's horror for a number of reasons, in that like Ian said, yeah, it's the world where your nightmares are real and you can't comfort your children. And it's just taken at a very face value where it's like there's government agencies, there's cops, it's in the news, where it's just like, yeah, how it takes a very realistic, sober and dry approach to like, yeah, what if we had to deal with these things?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a reader of noir or a fan of the genre, Ian starts the book almost with what would be a once upon a time for a fairy tale. Like, it's a fairy tale if you start with once upon a time. But for the noir, I feel like the once upon a time, what would you say is we get our character, he's a detective, he's in his office, he's probably in his chair with his feet up. Either a quote unquote, to use the outdid, either a dame walks in the office, a client comes on the phone call. You get it without exposition. You get the narration without exposition. You dropped in, and it's that scene. It's that opening scene. And as soon as we got that in Sycamore, we're introduced to Ren, the detective, and we knew it was noir. So tell us, when did you decide to make Sycamore really following a noir, really to mix that noir and have this one be a super, how do you say it? Super noir trail?
Super noir, actually. And don't worry, it's taken me, like I said, over a decade to probably figure out how to say that properly. So, yeah, but well, thank you, first of all, for the kind words about the book. You basically, I mean, I'm always glad when someone enjoys the work, but when someone gets it, really understands what I'm trying to do, it really means a lot to me, because you never know what's going to translate when your book sort of goes out into the world. But you touched on something about how, like, sort of the Felix Wren stories are noir, and how other stories in the Blackland series could be different, because that was really what I wanted to do. Like, tonally, this world can be anything. Like, if I write a story with another character, and I have plans for doing that, that story won't be noir because it's different tone. So I knew, and my editor at Cemetery Dance is on board with this, was that we're going to do Supernatural Tales of the reprint next year. The following year, we're going to do the second Felix Wren novel, which I can tell you about if you want to know. Yeah. And then the following year, we're going to do we're going to pivot, and I'm going to do a Blacklands book with a character who appears in Sycamore. She's a PIA agent, and she's getting her own book. So I wanted to be able, at that point, there'll have been 3 Felix Wren books. So I wanted to turn and do a different type of Blacklands book with this different character who's really fun, but they're very different types of stories. She's a federal agent. She's got a different attitude, a different outlook, and therefore the stories tonally will be quite different. And for me, I think of them as sort of like paranormal procedurals, like Felix stories are supernatural noirs. This PIA agent, hers are paranormal procedurals. It's kind of like if Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs worked on the X-Files instead of behavioral science, like that's the vibe that I'm going for with those books. But for me,
I could see that. Because there's so many, there are a lot of different characters in here, and you've written it in such a way where, they really come across as you see those different different personalities and those different characters, and you could see how they could lend themselves, even right down to there was a really one of my favorite characters. He just had one small scene in one small chapter. It was, I think his name was Jerry Baldwin, the supernatural real estate agent. So at one point, Felix Wren, he's doing his investigations, and that's, again, it's going to the tone. If you like noir, you'll be delighted at how this really follows. This really feels like a classic noir movie, right down to like it. And it's great because it's what needs to feel familiar, feels familiar. Like it hits those satisfying beats of a noir, but it also feels really fresh because, it's in addition to just being, gangsters and mobsters, there's a whole other element of the supernatural in play. But when
I can tell you, like, I knew that book Sycamore, like, there was so much pressure to get it right because it has to launch a series. It has to stand on its own if it doesn't do well. I wanted to tell a contained story. I didn't know cliffhangers, none of that stuff. I wanted people to enjoy the book on its own in case there's never another one. I really wanted to honor its noir traditions. And I also had to almost kind of reboot the series for all the people that had never read a Blackland story before. I've been
Yeah.
doing these stories for over 15 years, and I knew there was going to be some people, so I didn't want to do a clean reboot. I wanted to honor those stories before, and this is definitely a continuation. There's references to previous stories, but I had to do it in such a way that I didn't exclude the new reader, you know?
I felt like I really have to say I felt like you threaded that needle, not even threaded that needle. It's smooth. It really, I think you really hit all those parts. This book, it's lean, it's mean, it's fast paced in the right ways, and it's not bogged down with the past. It's not bogged down with the future. Yet, in addition to being a self-contained, enjoyable, tight story, there's also that breathing room around the edges where all the things you're telling me are making sense. Where I'm like, oh yeah, could totally see how it's. I think it's a great jump-in point for a new reader. It feels like the start. But yeah, if you're a longtime Blacklands reader, there's plenty in here that's going to delight you or feel like a tie-in. And yet, it's really exciting because yeah, you could see how any of these characters could really carry the weight of their own book. We don't want to talk.
I need to up those stakes too. That was the other thing I didn't. I also had to realize with the other stories, all up to now have been short stories and certainly novellas as well. But for a full novel, I knew I didn't want to do like a big tentpole book with explosions and huge set pieces. Like it's still a very intimate. This is one character solving this case. It's got that intimacy to it.
Yeah.
But I wanted there to be a bigger antagonist. I wanted to introduce a bigger scope, like actual story and character arcs that will carry on. So I knew that Felix needed a bigger foil than just what monster is he going to encounter in this one. And there is a monster in this one, but there also is a larger threat with this. I don't want to spoil anything, but there is a larger threat from this larger body that is going to carry on through future books.
Let's talk about some of the characters, and if I go into spoiler territory, we'll just pass on it. But we've talked about Felix, and we've talked about the federal agent. I believe her name is Agent Alice. Alice. And she has a partner. Her partner is Diane, who's homebound from Boca Sombra, Florida. Is that right? So we have and we talked about Jerry. So one of the things that's also cool about the book is you've written some of these Blacklands books are really dark and really on the horror. But in addition to being noir, there's a real levity and there's a real humor in that. And Felix's wife or partner is Sandra, Sandra D. She's a character here, and there's a lot of the humor and banter about that character. Can we talk about some of the maybe just talk about them by name, not by spoiler? Some of the criminals, some of the colorful criminal elements in here. One of the characters in his investigation. So Felix is trying to solve a case, and it's a missing persons case, and he comes across. I think the first criminal person is that he's not Mr. Mars. He's just Mars.
Just Mars, yeah. Like I think he's a criminal. Like he's like a Godfather type character. He's the leader of a criminal organization. One of these heads of the criminal organization called the Planets, and basically they've named themselves, or they call themselves after the planets. So Mars basically controls Toronto, most of that area, in terms of various criminal enterprises, and so other people, other crime lords in the planets control other cities in North America and abroad. So Felix, throughout the course of his investigation, ends up becoming into the I guess you could say the orbit of Mars. Falls sort of under his eye and realizes that
no pun intended.
But yeah, I mean the reason why, again, everything in my world is kind of dipped into supernatural. So I thought, just like you've got a character like Jerry Baldwin, because if haunted houses exist in this world, someone has to sell them. Well, if you've got the supernatural element, criminals would find some way to monetize it or use it for their criminal activities. So it's very dangerous. Obviously, the Blacklands are very dangerous. So the planets are known as being kind of crazy, because you would have to be crazy to say use a portal as a warehouse for contraband, or to employ supernatural creatures as bodyguards or enforcers in your organization. So no normal criminal would do that. But the planets are just, they're dangerous. That's to really to show how sort of off kilter they even are, and you can't sort of dismiss them as being crazy because they're very good at what they do. They are kind of the top of that food chain, which again drives home to the fact that they're just very dangerous. They have adapted to this supernatural landscape and incorporated it into their criminal enterprise. And I thought that was going to be that would be the perfect sort of foil for Felix, kind of like how James Bond has Spectre, you know, like this huge organization with all of its tentacles out in the world. Felix has got the planets, and this novel was sort of this introduction to the person who controls Toronto, which is Mars, and his sister, who is very unbalanced, Vermilion, and they are just this brother and sister duo. There's a little bit of Greek tragedy in there for the people that like analogy and metaphor, but yeah, I mean, it's just something that it's also kind of a noir trope, you know, like the criminal enterprise, the criminal organization, the one man versus this insurmountable force, you know.
Speaking of noir tropes, one, you know, it got me thinking how noir and weird fiction, you know, weird fiction being a set or a cousin of horror, of what they share and how they differ and how that comes into play in this book. One of the things about noir and why noir almost feels supernatural, even when it's played straight, is that in noir, there's always this element of the unknown. And there's always this element that the world is not only larger than what the protagonist, often the detective, thinks. It's always not what it seems. You know, he or she is taking the reader into the unknown. And then it strikes me what's different about it is in weird fiction, that is the catalyst. And often, if not always, in weird fiction, we don't get an explanation. Like we don't get, okay, he's in this world. And at least in a lot of the weird fiction I read is we don't get like, okay, we don't get a reveal. But in noir, I think some of the fun, or a big part of the fun, is we do get the reveal. And that's what I think. I think you really hit those tropes on the head in the right ways. You hit the beats right, because one of the things that's great about Sycamore is we get a lot of twists, and we're not going to tell any of them, but there are a lot of twists and turns. There are a lot of mysteries, but unlike in weird fiction, there are a lot of reveals. Right. And that is that is Felix's journey, and that's the novel structure in there are these reveals. I'll ask you about some of your favorite noirs, and you mentioned a couple. One of my favorites is The Long Goodbye, particularly, and I think there's been so many iterations of it, but the one that I love is the early 70s, the Robert Altman version.
Oh yeah,
have you seen that one?
Oh yeah, it's very subversive. Like it's really stands on its own, because it honors the tropes and of course the source material, while still doing something on its own, which is kind of brave, because I respect someone who doesn't like it, but at the same time, even if I didn't, and I like it a lot, but even if I didn't, I would respect someone trying to do what he did with it. You know, you have to honor that kind of bravery in filmmaking.
I mean, it's the one that I always come back to, in addition to just being, I think you're a cat person, I'm a cat person, just opening up with, you know, he's the crazy cat man, but cat lovers aside, the point I wanted to make was there's a point in the middle of the movie where he's knee deep, ankle deep, neck deep in his investigation. And even though it's not a supernatural movie, to me, it almost feels supernatural, where he's investigating the psychologist, and there's like this party scene, and it almost feels like that scene is so weird, where it almost feels supernatural to me. Like it's like it's so unusual, and it's so unusual to him that it almost feels supernatural, that the world is expanding. And I really loved the tone of that. What are some of your favorite? Besides, I mean, you mentioned Falling Angel and the corresponding movie Angel Heart, which is also kind of that's just way up there as well. What are some of your favorites? And
well, first of all, I want to say you absolutely hit the nail on the head, because I obviously feel like supernatural and noir goes very well together. But I think when you were talking about comparing it with sort of weird fiction, I think you're exactly right. I think the reason why they go well so together is because they actually do have a lot of connections. When you see a noir story, it's with, obviously there's no supernatural, it's a crime story, it's a thriller story, but there's a darkness to it where it doesn't really quite feel like our world, because everyone is kind of like a jerk in it, or suspicious, or out for themselves. Like, that's why those stories are so ramped with betrayal and twists, right?
And
like,
danger, the stakes are hard, and it's almost a trope. It's almost like the rug is going to get pulled out. What you think is bottom is going to be up at some point in the noir story. What you think was settled is unsettled. What you think is X is going to turn out to be Y. And I think
for me, like in the supernatural, it's the supernatural is the part that's the unknown, because we don't know what it is. But I actually do think the noir has an unknown, and the unknown is, why are these people like this, and why are they doing these things? I think the unknown in a noir is the character's motivations, which is why you have so many twists and trails and everything. Because this person who I thought I was working for actually is working against me. This person who I thought was nice is actually evil and is trying to kill me. So I think the unknown are the characters, and because they're people, human beings, it's like, which is of course the opposite of the supernatural. I actually think that's why those two things really end up going together well, because you think you're talking to a normal human being, and for all intents and purposes you are, but you have no idea what's going on in their mind. That's the true unknown, their motivations, what they're going to do to you. Like, that to me is the ultimate twist. I think that's part of the reason why I really love noir. That's right. In response to your question, it was funny. You're asking me about some of my favorites. One that I revisited recently because I was talking to Norm Partridge about it. Norm very kindly read Sycamore and gave me a quote for it. Norm actually gave me a quote from my very first Blackland story, like 15 years ago, the chapbook Temporary Monsters. And I reached out to him because he said, well, when Sycamore comes out, send me a copy. I'd love to blurb it for you. So I was like, sure, absolutely. And he gave me a very kind blurb, compared Felix to Carl Kolchak, which is about the best you could possibly get. And we just started talking to detective stories and things that we like, because Norma and I like all the same stuff. And he's always trying to get me to come out to the Bay Area where he lives, and because he grew up in that area when the Zodiac Killer was active. So he's like, come out and I'll give you a true crime tour and show you everywhere the Zodiac hit, because he knows me and my wife are big true crime buffs, and we love the Zodiac movie that Fincher made. So my wife's going to go there probably to go to Napa and enjoy the red wine, and I want to go there to see the Zodiac Killer tour. But the movie that we were talking about was Harper, which is an adaptation of Ross MacDonald's very first novel, The Moving Target. And Ross MacDonald is probably my favorite author of detective fiction. I love Dashiell Hammett. I make a Dashiell Hammett Thin Man reference in the first chapter of Sycamore. Obviously, I love Raymond Chandler. The three of them are kind of like the trifecta of detective fiction, and they basically form what we think of today with the stereotypical detective. It comes from those three guys. But for me, Harper is just incredibly accurate to the novel, for one, in a time when even the best adaptations would sort of do their own thing. But Harper is unusually accurate to the source material, and maybe it's because it was written by William Goldman, an incredible screenwriter. So I think a lot of these things came together. Paul Newman, not quite playing the Lou Archer of the books, but close enough, and it is Paul Newman, so who cares? He's so great in that movie.
What year was that? Now I feel like I've seen it. Like it
was the only reason I remember it was 66, because Janet Leigh plays his ex-wife, and I looked up. I was trying to figure how old would her daughter Jamie Lee Curtis have been at that time, and she was 8 years old when Harper was made. Because I always forget about all this Hollywood royalty.
The Moving Target. Who's the author of that one?
Ross MacDonald. Yeah, and there was another guy. There's a young guy. It's like I sort of recognize this guy, but I definitely recognize his voice. And it's like a 28-year-old Robert Wagner is in this movie. So I
have seen it. I'm going to revisit it now.
It's fantastic. It absolutely holds up. I just watched it last week. Yeah.
Well, hey, I think it's time. Will you? How about giving us a reading from some of Sycamore? I'm going to turn the screen over to you. Let me know when you're done. And so here is Ian Rogers reading from Sycamore.
Sycamore. All right, I'm going to read the first couple chapters here. I'm even going to read the dedication because this is my wife had to wait years to have a book dedicated to her and then had to wait because I wouldn't let her read the dedication until it was published. So this is for Catherine, My Light in the Darkness. Chapter 1. I was right in the middle of getting my ass chewed out when the phone rang. Sandra was the one doing the chewing, and she kept right on going without missing a beat or taking a breath, or answering the phone for that matter, even though it was her job. I wanted to ask her to hold on a minute so I could answer it myself, but I was nervous about interrupting her. Sandra scared me a bit. She was my assistant, but she was also my ex-wife. Not my smartest move, perhaps, but we had history, some of it pretty good. And even though our marriage was over, we had discovered we weren't quite done with each other yet. Some people thought I was crazy to have her work for me. Some days I agreed with them. You're a snake, Sandra said, stabbing a finger at me. A cheap snake. And that's the worst kind, Felix. I was sitting with my feet up on the corner of my desk. Sandra was sitting with her hands on her hips in the doorway to the outer office. She was almost as tall as me, about 5'10", with cool gray eyes, sharp features, and short ash blonde hair. I considered telling her she was beautiful when she was angry, then decided I liked my testicles right where they were. The current topic of discussion was money, an unpopular subject when we were married, and one that still managed to rear its ugly head from time to time since our divorce. Sandra said I wasn't paying her enough and wanted a raise. I told her I couldn't afford it. She said I could. We went back and forth like that for a while. Then I did something stupid. Occupational hazard, you could say. Not as a private investigator, but as an ex-husband. I told her I could maybe afford to give her a raise, but only if I could write it off as alimony on my taxes. I'd meant it as a joke, but like most of my witticisms in my repertoire, Sandra didn't find it funny. She replied that if we were going to go down that road, then she should have been paid a salary for the 7 years we were married. She further stated that she should have also received an asshole bonus for lasting that long. Even though we'd been divorced for 2 years, we slipped into the old argument like a comfortable pair of pants. Sandra crossed her arms and said, "You know what your problem is, Felix? Too much handsome in one body? You don't appreciate me. You didn't when we were married, and you don't now. I do so much around here, and you don't even care. I type your reports, I send out your invoices, and I keep your office clean because you're too much of a slob to do it yourself. I reorganized your entire filing system." She made a derisive sound. Reorganized? Hell, you didn't even have a system until I came along. I do all of your computer shit because you don't even know how to turn one on. Big surprise there. You've always had trouble turning things on. Ouch. I sort the mail, I pay the bills, I cook for you, I clean. Whoa, hold on. I raised my hands in a halting gesture. I think you traveled back in time there for a minute. Sandra stared at me in seething silence. And to be fair, Dee, you never cooked or cleaned even when we were married. If you recall, I was the one who did all that stuff. It was true, but it was clearly the wrong thing to say. Maybe because I'd brought up the past. Maybe because I'd used her old nickname. Probably both. It didn't matter. Sandra continued to glare at me, and the phone continued to ring. Neither of us made a move to answer it. I'd like to pay you more, I said. I really would. But the money just isn't there. I'm doing the best I can, Sandra. Most private investigators can't even afford to have an assistant. The truth was I could barely afford her. Sandra had started working for me shortly after the divorce. She needed the work and I needed the help. The past couple of years had marked the strangest, most dangerous period in my life, and hiring my ex-wife was the least of it. The funny thing was, when we weren't arguing with each other about money or the barely healed wound that was our marriage, we actually made a pretty good team, which further confirmed to me that on some level we still needed each other. Not for love or money, but for some other reason neither of us could put into words. Most days we got along fine. This just happened to be one of the other days. Sandra said, "Well?" And I realized I'd zoned out for a moment while she'd been speaking. What was the question again? Sandra shook her head in wary frustration. "You're a real asshole, Felix. Listen, I'll do what I can, okay? I'll take a look at the books and see if I can figure something out." "You'll look at the books," Sandra snapped. "You can barely add. I'm the one who does your taxes every year." I spread my hands. Then you should know I don't have the money to give you a raise. Sandra frowned, and I thought that was the end of it. Problem solved. Okay, not solved, but put off for the time being. Then she hit me where she knew it would hurt. You need to take on more cases. I take plenty of more of those cases. You know PIs don't get hazard pay, right? I like to pay my rent this month, Felix, and I like to eat too. I looked down at my hands folded in my lap. Let's get back to work, okay? Sandra didn't say anything. I glanced over at the ringing phone. You can start right now. Sandra said, oh, really drawing it out. I was impressed with the amount of sarcasm she was able to inject into that one little word. You want me to answer the phone? Is that what you'd like? Okay, let me get that for you. She came over, picked up the phone, cradle and all, and threw it at my head. Fortunately, I have the reflexes of a cat. Makes sense since I was named after one. I leaped out of my chair. The phone struck the wall behind me and clattered to the floor. It's for you, Sandra said sweetly, then turned and walked out of the room. I let out a deep sigh as I reached over to pick up the phone. Nick and Nora Charles, we were not. Chapter 2. Felix Wren's House of Pancakes, how may I serve you? There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought Sandra had broken the phone when she heaved it at me. Then a female voice said, Hello? Is this Felix Wren? None other. The private investigator? The very one. Oh. Like Sandra, the caller managed to pack a lot of emotion into that one word. In Sandra's case, it had been sarcasm. This time it was the unmistakable sound of disappointment. How can I help you? I was wondering if I could speak with you about some work, a case. She sighed. I'm sorry, I've never done anything like this before. That's okay, I said. What's your name? Susan, she said. Susan Weaver. I'm calling about my husband. He's missing. Have you notified the police? The police know, she said in a dismissive way, but frankly, I don't have much faith in them. It might be better if we talked about this in person. Can you come by my office? I live in Sycamore, Mr. Wren, and I have a daughter. It's very difficult for me to get down to the city right now. Would you mind coming here? Sure, I said. Sycamore, the name rang a distant bell, but I couldn't make the connection. It'll take me a couple of hours to get out there. That's okay, she said. I could hear the relief in her voice. I'll be waiting for you. I jotted down her address and said I'd see her in a little while. After hanging up the phone and placing it back on the corner of my desk, I took out my road atlas and looked up Sycamore. Seeing it on the map didn't help me understand why it sounded familiar. Located north of the city, it was one of those small towns that people pass through on their way up to cottage country in the Muskokas. I'd probably driven through it myself and never given it a second thought, but the name still nibbled at my mind. I went over to the door to the outer office and peeked out. Sandra was sitting at her desk, looking at something on her computer monitor. AD, it looks like we may have a case. Do you think you could rustle me up some directions? Sandra didn't say anything. Something was up and I knew right away it didn't have anything to do with me. The silent treatment was never her style. I came up behind her and looked over her shoulder. Normally she hated that, but her attention was so focused on the screen she didn't even notice I was there. She was on the CNN website watching video of a breaking news report. They were showing aerial footage of a park in a city I didn't immediately recognize. Then the view swung around to a stadium in the background that I knew was Fenway. The super at the bottom of the screen said, New portal appears in Boston. There we go.
All right. Thank you so much for that reading. Can you hold up can we get a look at the, yeah, let's hold it up there for a second. That was the first two chapters of Sycamore by Ian Rogers, which you'll be able to order at the time of this broadcast from Cemetery Dance Publications. Ian, what's the best place? What are the places you can connect with Sycamore?
You know what? I used to be a web guy, so I've got websites for all my work. So I've actually got a official website for the Blacklands. If you go to theblacklands.com, you can get all kinds of information about the background of the city. There's an FAQ, there's reviews, and there's all kinds of order links. So
fantastic. So you could probably get it directly from the publisher, Cemetery Dance. You could get it at
Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Chapters, Indigo. There'll be links for everyone.
Fantastic. Do you have a local bookstore that's close to you that you like? Do you have a favorite indie bookstore that we can talk about? Which one would that be?
It's called Take Cover Books. It's run by a pair of brothers here in Peterborough, and they're both musicians that decided to open a bookstore. They were actually doing like an online bookstore during the pandemic, and they would actually deliver the books you ordered from them by car, by bicycle, like while the pandemic was going on. And then they opened a store once the lockdowns were done. And me and Richard Gavin, another writer who's a friend of mine, we did an event there last October and had a great time. So
great.
I have Sycamore in stock, and
take Cover Books, and that's in
Take Cover Books.
Oh, fantastic. Of course, I always do things backwards. It's the end of the show, but I never introduce myself. I am Daniel Braum. I'm your host. I'm the author of The Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales, which you can get from Cemetery Dance. So it was a pleasure having you here, Ian. Congratulations on the launch of Sycamore and the other great books. Stay connected while we disconnect. And for everyone tuning in, thank you for joining us. Please pick up Sycamore, which is out now. You can get it at blacklance.com or wherever you buy books. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Daniel.